Once you've set up a basic custom command project, you'll likely need your command to accept parameters in order for it to be useful. So that's what we'll cover in this video, passing parameters to Commandbox custom commands. We'll pick up where we left off with a basic custom command project. Here's what the directory structure looks like. We have a module config.cfc in the root of the project that simply contains an empty configure method. We have a box.json in the root that defines this project as a Commandbox module. Then within the commands directory, we've namespaced this command under date help, and the command itself is today. We have the today.cfc for that. We've linked this package to the Commandbox core by running package link, and that enables us to use the command while we're developing it. So we can run date help today, and you'll see that it returns the date in a long format. Now let's dive into that method and see what we have there. Now we might want this command to return the date in a short format instead of a long format. And while we could set up another command, another CFC for that, a better approach would be to use parameters. So how would we pass a short parameter to this method, to this command, in order to change the format of the date we're returning? We'll add a short argument here, a Boolean argument, and when it's present, we'll return the date in a short format. But when it's not, it'll function as normal, returning the date in a long format. So if we get short, we'll return short, but otherwise we'll continue to return long, and we'll use that format coming from that parameter to determine the date. All right, let's hop back and remember that when we make changes, we need to reload the CLI. And now we can run date help. Let's make sure that it functions. And once I hit tab, you'll see that Commandbox has picked up that parameter that we added, that argument that we added to the function, and it gives me Autosuggest. So I can say short equals true. And a short formatted date returns. But of course, I could keep using it the way that I had before and return the long date. Now, an important thing to note here is that Commandbox automatically handles named and positional parameters. So while in that previous example, we had done short equals true, because short is the first argument, we could simply pass in true. And because Commandbox handles positional parameters, that would get passed as the short argument, the short parameter, and impact the way that the command runs. Also, for Boolean arguments, Commandbox supports flags. So we could also write -- short, and because it's a Boolean toggle and it's defaulting to false, when we pass in -- short, it knows that we want to flag that argument as true, and the same result comes back. So we can use named, positional, or flags for this Boolean argument. Now, I mentioned that Autosuggest, that Autocomplete, picked up the arguments, but to a user, it's not very clear what these arguments do. And Commandbox makes it easy to add help to those. We'll hop over to the documentation here, and again, we'll go to developing for Commandbox, commands, and tab help and completion. For parameters, if you do the name of the parameter .hint, the information that you add there will be included in the Autosuggest. So in here, we'll add a hint for short, and we'll say when true, returns the date in a short format. And now to the user encountering this for the first time, when they run date help today, that hint, short.hint, is provided here to show them what this option does, what this flag does. Now, short and long are two date formats, but we might want a little bit more flexibility in what we're returning. So we could try to change this parameter to a string, and we'll default it to long since that's what we've been using. We'll update our hint. Well, now it's called format, and we'll say the format dictates the format the date is returned in. And we could base what we return here on that format parameter. Now in here I could write short and get that result. Or I could do medium. And remember, positional parameters are supported. So I could also just pass in full in that first position and get an even longer formatted date. And this would even give us some flexibility where we could pass in month, month, day, day, year, 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 and get that as a result. So that's how we're handling a string parameter. But like I said, we don't get that nice autocomplete when we're relying entirely on the user's input. So Commandbox gives us a couple ways to still provide autocomplete for the parameters being passed into our custom command. For parameter value completion, the easiest and most simple approach, which works in a lot of cases, are static options. So when you do the name of a parameter.options, you can provide a comma-separated list of the options that are available for that. So in here, I could write, oops, that was wrong. I could write format hint, format options, and we could put short, long, short, medium, long, full. And now these options will be made available during the autocomplete. So when a user comes in, date help today, and now when I tab, you'll see that full, long, short, and medium are made available to the user for that autocomplete. Another approach to handling options would be using an options UDF. You'll see in the Commandbox documentation that by doing parameter name dot options UDF, we can include the name of a function, and that function can return an array of options. And that gives us some flexibility with how we determine what options are going to be returned. So let's take a look at how this would work, returning data. We'll do our format options UDF, and we'll call it complete formats. Let's hop over to the docs now, and we can take a look at how that options UDF is structured. You'll see here that it returns an array, and it accepts two parameters that are provided by Commandbox. A string that is the param so far, that's what's been typed up to this point, and a struct of past named parameters. So that's a struct with the names and values of the parameters that have been passed up to this point. So we'll copy that. Ours is called complete formats. And if we want to mimic the functionality that we had when we had static options, we could just type in here short, medium, long, full, and then just to show you that it's different, we can add another option to the list. So the options UDF calls complete formats returns an array, but we could do anything that we wanted in this function. Let's reload to get those changes. And you'll see when we run date help, today, the autocomplete now has those 5 values from that function. Now, our options UDF here is fairly limited. It just returns an array, so it's basically the same as static options. But this is a place where you might include API calls, file system reads, or just some custom logic that would provide a more user-friendly response. And rather than coming up with a contrived example for a date help command, I thought it might make sense to look at an existing custom command which utilizes the options UDF. One that does is Pete Freitag's cfdocs command. So we can install cfdocs. Now, what the cfdoc command does is provide command line access to the cfdocs documentation. So I can start typing any cold fusion function or tag, and the names are auto-completed. And if I select one of those options, I get the documentation for the tag. And the way that that tab completion is provided is via the options UDF. So let's take a quick look at that. Over here on cfdocs, it's the cfdocs command. We can go over to the GitHub repository, and you'll see that it's structured much like our project. Within cfdoc and the doc.cfc, you'll see that there is an options UDF with autocomplete name. And if we go down to the autocomplete name function, you'll see that it's making a CF HTTP call to a URL and then parsing the results. So that's how cfdoc command uses that options UDF to provide a much richer and very helpful user experience. Now, hopping back to our project, there's one last type of parameter I'd like to go over, and that is file parameters, because Commandbox handles them in a very helpful way. So to do this, we're going to make a new file within our commands directory. And we'll make a file specific one. We'll call it file.cfc. And this could return the date that a file was last modified. That's how it could be a helpful date command. We don't need that. And we don't need this. We will pass in a file, we'll call it path, the path to a file, and then we'll return the date that file was modified. The path to a file whose modification date you want. So we'll pass in a string. It'll be called path. And then let's just return that string so we can see what we're working with. So now when we run date help, we don't just have today as an option, we also have file. And file accepts a path parameter, and you'll see that Commandbox now, because the parameter is named path, assumes that it's a file or folder and provides autocomplete for directories and files in the system. So if I select box.json, I get box.json returned. Let's hop over to the docs to see what it has to say about file path completion. Now you'll see parameters with the name directory, destination, file, or path automatically have file system suggestions, which is super helpful in this case. And there's some options you can use to provide that functionality for other named parameters that don't fall within this name. But since we have path, that's why we're getting autocomplete. Now, we do need to note that when we're using file system paths as parameters, that box.json isn't enough. We need an absolute path to that file. And the way to do this is to use resolve path. Commandbox makes this method available to you, and it will return an absolute and canonical path to the file so that you're able to work with it. So let's add that method in here. Make an absolute path, and we'll say it is resolve path to the path that we've received. And then let's just return that to see how it differs from what we have now. So again, we'll run date help file, and we'll pass in that box.json. And in this case, you'll see that the absolute and canonical path to that file has been returned. So that's now something that we can work with. So if we wanted to get the date modified, we might do something like this. This isn't a function I use very often. Get file info from the absolute path. And actually, I don't remember exactly what get file info returns. So since we have cfdocs, we can do cfdocs doc get file info. And it returns a struct with keys such as last modified. So we'll hop back here and we'll do file info dot last modified. And if we reload, we should be able to run date help file, pass in that box.json, and get the date when it was last modified. And that's it. We've reviewed how Commandbox can handle named and positional parameters, as well as Boolean flags, how you can provide static and dynamic autocomplete options, and finally, how to work with file system parameters for your custom commands.